occurred, and also true that Gandhi, with, one gathers, a good deal of moral pressure in the opposite direction, always gave the patient the choice of staying alive at the price of committing a sin. Still, if the decision had been solely his own, he would have forbidden the animal food, whatever the risks might be. There must, he says, be some limit to what we will do in order to remain alive, and the limit is well on this side of chicken broth. This attitude is perhaps a noble one, but, in the sense which, I think, most people would give to the word, it is inhuman. The essence of being human is that one does not seek perfection, that one is sometimes willing to commit sins for the sake of loyalty, that one does not push asceticism to the point where it makes friendly intercourse impossible, and that one is prepared in the end to be defeated and broken up by life, which is the inevitable price of fastening one's love upon other human individuals. No doubt alcohol, tobacco, and so forth are things that a saint must avoid, but sainthood is also a thing that human beings must avoid. There is an obvious retort to this, but one should be wary about making it. In this yogi-ridden age, it is too readily assumed that quote-unquote non-attachment is not only better than a full acceptance of earthly life, but that the ordinary man only rejects it because it is too difficult. In other words, that the average human being is a failed saint. It is doubtful whether this is true. Many people genuinely do not wish to be saints, and it is possible that some who achieve or aspire to sainthood have never felt much temptation to be human beings. If one could follow it to its psychological roots, one would, I believe, find that the main motive for quote-unquote non-attachment is a desire to escape from the pain of living, and above all from love, which, sexual or non-sexual, is hard work. But it is not necessarily here to argue whether the otherworldly or the humanistic ideal is quote-unquote higher. The point is that they are incompatible. One must choose between God and man. And all quote-unquote radicals and quote-unquote progressives, from the mildest liberal to the most extreme anarchist, have in effect chosen man. However, Gandhi's pacifism can be separated to some extent from his other teachings. Its motive was religious, but he claimed also for it that it was a definite technique, a method, capable of producing desired political results. Gandhi's attitude was not that of most Western pacifists. Satyagraha, first evolved in South Africa, was a sort of non-violent warfare, a way of defeating the enemy without hurting him and without feeling or arousing hatred. It entailed such things as civil disobedience, strikes, lying down in front of railway trains, enduring police charges without running away and without hitting back, and the like. Gandhi objected to quote-unquote passive resistance as a translation of satyagraha. In Gujarati, it seems, the word means, quote, firmness in the truth, unquote. In his early days, Gandhi served as a stretcher bearer on the British side in the Boer War, and he was prepared to do the same again in the War of 1914 to 1918. Even after he had completely abjured violence, he was honest enough to see that in war it is usually necessary to take sides. He did not, indeed, since his whole political life centered around a struggle for national dependence, he could not take the sterile and dishonest line of pretending that in every war both sides are exactly the same and it makes no difference who wins. Nor did he, like most Western pacifists, specialize in avoiding awkward questions. In relation to the late war, one question that every pacifist had a clear obligation to answer was, quote, what about the Jews? Are you prepared to see them exterminated? If not, how do you propose to save them without resorting to war? Unquote. I must honestly say that I have never heard from any Western pacifist an honest answer to this question, though I have heard plenty of evasions, usually of the quote-unquote you're another type. But it so happens that Gandhi was asked a somewhat similar question in 1938, and that his answer is on record in Mr. Louis Fisher's essay, Gandhi and Stalin. According to Mr. Fisher, Gandhi's view was that the German Jews ought to commit collective suicide, which, quote, would have aroused the world and the people of Germany to Hitler's violence, unquote. After the war, he justified himself. The Jews had been killed anyway, and might as well have died significantly. One has the impression that this attitude staggered even so warm an admirer as Mr. Fisher, but Gandhi was merely being honest. If you are not prepared to take life, you must often be prepared for lives to be lost in some other way. When, in 1942, he urged nonviolent resistance against a Japanese invasion, he was ready to admit that it might cost several million deaths. At the same time, there is reason to think that Gandhi, who after all was born in 1869, did not understand the nature of totalitarianism and saw everything in terms of his own struggle against the British government. The important point here is not so much that the British treated him forbearingly, as that he was always able to command publicity. As can be seen from the phrase quoted above, he believed in, quote, arousing the world, unquote, which is only possible if the world gets a chance to hear what you are doing. It is difficult to see how Gandhi's methods could be applied in a country where opponents of the regime disappear in the middle of the night and are never heard of again. Without a free press and the right of assembly, it is impossible not merely to appeal to outside opinion, but to bring a mass movement into being, or even to make your intentions known to your adversary. Is there a Gandhi in Russia at this moment? If there is, what is he accomplishing? The Russian masses could only practice civil disobedience if the same idea happened to occur to all of them simultaneously. And even then, to judge by the history of the Ukraine famine, it would make no difference. But let it be granted that nonviolent resistance can be effective against one's own government, or against any occupying power. Even so, how does one put it into practice internationally? Gandhi's various conflicting statements on the late war seem to show that he felt the difficulty of this. Applied to foreign politics, pacifism either stops being pacifist or becomes appeasement. Moreover, the assumption, which served Gandhi so well in dealing with individuals, that all human beings are more or less approachable and will respond to a generous gesture, needs to be serious. And, so far as one can gauge the feelings of whole nations, is there any apparent connection between a generous deed and a friendly response? Is gratitude a factor in human international politics? These and kindred questions need discussion, and need it urgently, in the few years left to us before somebody presses the button and the rockets begin to fly. It seems doubtful whether a civilization can stand another major war, and it is at least thinkable that the way out lies through nonviolence. It is Gandhi's virtue that he would have been ready to give honest consideration to the kind of question that I have raised above. And indeed, he probably did discuss most of these questions somewhere or other in his innumerable newspaper articles. One feels of him that there was much that he did not understand, but not that there was anything that he was frightened of saying or of thinking. I have never been able to feel much liking for Gandhi, but I do not feel sure that as a political thinker he was wrong in the main. Nor do I believe that his life was a failure. It is curious that when he was assassinated, many of his warmest admirers exclaimed sorrowfully that he had lived just long enough to see his life work in ruins, because India was engaged in a civil war which had always been foreseen as one of the byproducts of the transfer of power. But it was not in trying to smooth down Hindu-Muslim rivalry that Gandhi had spent his life. His main political objective, the peaceful ending of British rule, had, after all, been attained. As usual, the relevant facts cut across one another. On the other hand, the British did get out of India without fighting, an event which very few observers, indeed, would have predicted until about a year before it happened. On the other hand, this was done by a Labour government, and it is certain that a Conservative government, especially a government headed by Churchill, would have acted differently. But if, by 1945, there had grown up in Britain a large body of opinion sympathetic to Indian independence, how far was this due to Gandhi's personal influence? And if, as may happen, India and Britain finally settled down into a decent and friendly relationship, will this be partly because Gandhi, by keeping up his struggle obstinately and without hatred, disinfected the political air? That one even thinks of asking such questions indicates his stature. One may feel, as I do, a sort of aesthetic distaste for Gandhi. One may reject the claims of sainthood made on his behalf. He never made any such claim himself, by the way. One may also reject sainthood as an ideal, and therefore feel that Gandhi's basic aims were anti-human and reactionary. But regarded simply as a politician, and compared with the other leading political figures of our time, how clean a smell he has managed to leave behind.